Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. So thanks so much for joining. It's really nice to see some names that I recognise today. So today's webinar is all about managing the probationary period. We're also going to touch on the induction programme as well. So today's session is number 4 in our series of 10. So please do look out for the remaining few sessions we have coming up. Just to introduce myself, so my name's Sophie. I'm one of the HR advisors at Code. So it's lovely to see you all today, and thanks for joining. So let's have a look at our aims and objectives before we start our session today. So our aim from today's session is to increase our understanding of the induction and probationary process, and we want to help our managers to comply with employment legislation. Now, our objectives to help us to meet that aim, we're going to discuss an overview of our employee rights relating to the probation period. We're going to highlight the risks of not carrying out a thorough induction procedure. And we're going to explore how the Code Total HR package provides us with useful policies and template letters to help practices to comply with your legal obligations. Now, a couple of learning outcomes from today's session. We want to understand how we can avoid potentially costly mistakes when managing our employees during that probation period. We're also going to improve our understanding of the benefits of having a thorough induction programme in place. And we also want to understand how the statutory employment rights relate to the probation period. So to meet those aims and objectives, we're going to focus on a few key topics today. So we're briefly going to touch on Regulation 18 of the Health and Social Care Act and how that sort of implements with the staff induction. We're going to have a look at a staff induction programme, what it should include and why we need one. We're going to cover exactly what a probationary period is and how we can manage them. And then we're going to cover why it's important to seek advice at every stage if we're unsure. So let's start. So Regulation 18 of the Health and Social Care Act is to ensure that our team members receive such appropriate support, training, professional development, supervision and appraisals as is necessary for them and enables them to carry out the duties they are employed to perform. So the CQC interpret this and will want to see evidence that you are providing your new team members with a thorough induction programme. So let's have a look at an induction. So the key purpose of an induction is to integrate our new team member into the practice. So we want to enable them to become a really effective and motivated team member to ensure that they are fully aware and understand exactly what we need from them. And also to ensure that they're comfortable. There are lots of values that we can take from having a thorough induction process. Just to name a few, retention. So there's lots of studies that have very much suggested that having a really thorough and sort of comprehensive induction programme is going to help you long term with your staff retention. So by investing your time and effort during the induction stage, it's going to pay you dividends going forward. It's also going to help to carry out and sort of to carry through that really good impression that you've made throughout the recruitment process to attract your candidate and to secure them into the position. Now, I do have a couple of acts and regulations up on the screen just to make you aware of. So within our induction programme, for any new team member, we do need to be aware of the relevant acts and regulations. First of all, we need to ensure that we're complying with the Equality Act. So if our new team member perhaps has one of the protected characteristics, we need to ensure that we are making reasonable adjustments for that team member. So that, for example, could be a disability, it could be pregnancy, or it could be related to their race, religion, or gender. We also need to be aware of the regulations for both part-time workers and our fixed-term team members. So both of these types of employment, so your part-time and fixed-term employees, they have the right not to be treated less favourably or at a detriment because of their status. So we need to ensure that we're affording these team members the same opportunity as we would a full-time team member or a permanent employee. And that means having that thorough induction program in place for them. And there may be sort of adjustments that you would have to put in place for a part-time team member, for example. It's going to be a bit of a longer process than for a full-time team member. Some fixed-term sort of examples there would be if you've got a team member in the practice who's perhaps covering a period of maternity leave. And we also need to be aware of relatively new regulations that cover our apprentices. So there's a whole set of regulations that cover them not to be treated at a detriment or less favourably again. So we need to ensure we're affording them the same opportunity for a full and thorough induction programme. Now, an induction will also apply to any of your agency team as well. So any agency staff you have within the practice, you're still going to need to show that you followed an induction programme with them. So let's have a look at an induction process. The key to an induction process is having your framework in place. So your framework is going to be your employment and induction policy. Now we have one of these on iComply for you to download and adapt for the practice. We also have a really helpful staff induction overview document. I would highly recommend downloading this document, having a good read through before you have a new team member join, so that you're aware of your obligations with that induction, how to create an induction plan, and what you need to do with that new team member. So having your framework in place is going to be your starting point. So the structure of an induction, now it's going to be slightly different for each of your team members, depending on their role as well within the practice. An induction starts and is triggered before that team member joins the practice, and really is triggered when you send them their first set of key policies and procedures that relate to the practice. So from that point, we're telling that team member exactly what we expect from them going forward. The responsibility of an induction programme lies with the line manager of that new team member. So more often than not, that's going to be the practice manager, sort of within your practice setup. So it's their responsibility to not only create that induction plan, but also to ensure that it's followed through. I'd also recommend, as just a bit of a personal touch, that we give that new team member a call before their first day. This is just to ensure that they're fully aware of what to expect on their first day. Perhaps if you need to let them know any important travel or parking information, just so that they're aware and they sort of feel a bit more comfortable. Because I'm sure we've all been there. It's quite daunting on your first day in a new job. It's also a good idea to give them a call as well. And if you want to, there's nothing wrong with asking them to join a little bit later than the rest of the team. So maybe half an hour after the rest of the team have arrived, just so that you're fully prepared for their arrival, so that you can continue with that really good impression. So let's have a look at a few sort of key topics to cover in our induction programme. We do have an induction checklist on iComply that, again, I would recommend you download and adapt for the practice. It has tick boxes that you can follow through all the way through your induction programme to ensure that you've got all your relevant topics covered. Just a few of the really key topics. So firstly is your health and safety. So it's actually a legal requirement that we cover health and safety as part of a new team member's induction. And that goes for your sort of agency workers as well. We would need to let them know about the health and safety requirements at the practice. So when you're talking to them about health and safety, it can be on a number of different ways. I would recommend that they are fully aware of and have read and understood your health and safety policy at the practice. You can also let them have a copy of the health and safety risk assessment. So talk them through it, identify to them what risks they may potentially be at risk of, and how they can mitigate their risks themselves. Alongside your health and safety, you're also going to want to show them the emergency procedures. So your fire evacuation routes are going to be key here. Also, who to go to if they have a medical emergency, so who your first aiders in the team are. and sort of where those fire exits are. We can also talk them through, so some of your team members, it's going to be applicable to look through the your infection prevention procedures and your medical emergency procedures. And then for other team members, it's going to be more useful to have maybe a workstation audit or to talk them through your manual handling training. So that would be your health and safety requirements sort of ticked off there. Next up, I would recommend talking to them about the practice. So talking to them about the practice. So that can be a bit of history on how you've got to the place you're at, a bit of background on who owns the practice, how did it start, information that's going to really help that team member to fit into the team. You can also talk to them about the different roles and the different team members within the practice, just so that they're comfortable with what everybody else is doing and how they fit into that. During your practice information topic, you're also going to be giving them a tour of the practice. You can incorporate this when you're doing the fire evacuation procedures as well, but just ensure that they're aware of all the facilities. So they know where, if you have locker facilities, for example, they know where the bathrooms are, and they're aware of where they can go to rest and eat their lunch. A really key one for prevention is your code of conduct. So we really need to make sure that our new team members are aware of our expectations of them. So going through your code of conduct is going to be key for the prevention. So we need to ensure that we sit that team member down and really spell out to them what our expectations of them going forward is. And this will save you down the line having to, go over it again, perhaps if they said they weren't aware of it or it never happened. And key to the induction program is getting your new team member to sign and date it. So you could sign and date it after you've done each topic, or you can sign and date it at the end. But this is just going to build your really key audit records to prove that you have carried out the induction with that new team member. So alongside your induction, you're going to be running a probation period. Now, a probation period is a really key area in that new team member's sort of first few weeks and months with you. It's going to enable you, so why do we need them? Because it's going to enable you to identify whether that new team member is suitable, whether they're reliable, and whether they're capable for the role. So by having that probation period and having that time frame when you can really focus on that is going to be key for you understanding whether they are suitable for permanent employment with you. Now you can do this a number of ways, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a few more slides. But it's also important to understand that this isn't just going to happen during that first week. This is going to be an ongoing process over the weeks and months that new team member's with you. And it's important that we record the probation period so that we're building those audit trails. Also, just a quick point to consider here. So we get a lot of calls on the helpline. For example, we had one last week asking us what contract they can give their new team member who's just passed their probation period. Now, we had to point out to this practice, unfortunately, that they are actually being unlawful here because they needed to provide that team member with a contract or a statement of particulars at least within those first 2 months of that team member joining the practice. And there is actually no legal status of the probation period. So all of your new team members' statutory rights will be based on their start date with you. So that will be the date that they've joined the practice rather than the date they passed probation. Now, your team members on probation period are going to have a shorter length of service than the rest of the team, and they're not going to have that 2-year qualifying period to claim the standard unfair dismissal. What they do have, though, is the right to claim for discrimination. As I've spoke about during the recruitment webinar a couple of weeks ago, that discrimination sort of risk is still there even after sort of under that 2-year period. They also have the right to claim that their termination, for example, was for an automatically unfair reason or was in breach of their contract. So we just need to make sure that we are mitigating all our risks here by having those really clear audit trails, and we're aware of the probation period policy and procedure as well. So let's have a look at a couple of monitoring tools that we can use and what that monitoring period should be. Ideally, your roles in a practice, you should be looking at a probation period of approximately 3 months. So in some certain industries with those higher level key roles, it may be appropriate to have a longer probation period. But I would recommend for the roles you have in a practice environment, 3 months should be enough time for you to be able to understand the capability of that team member and their suitability for long-term employment with you. A couple of the tools that we can use to assess during that probation period, firstly is our job description. So we created the job description back in our recruitment stage, and that will be the one that we've either built on or are still working towards. So it's important that that team member has a copy of that job description and that they're fully aware and understand the role requirements. So we can use the job description as a monitoring tool to see how they're getting on and if they're delivering on their key tasks and responsibilities. We can also use our induction training plan. So this training plan would have been identified during the induction stage, and it may be that you've identified a couple of training needs or maybe development needs that that team member has expressed an interest in, or you've identified they needed. Now you can use this plan as part of your monitoring tool to see how they're getting on and how they're progressing against that plan. We can also use our probation records here. So we do have a template on iComply that you can use to record your probation reviews. And it's just important that we're using it and we're having a formal documentation to back up the fact that we are having these reviews and we are carrying out this monitoring. So in month 3, we might want to have a look back at month 1 and 2 just to see exactly what we asked them to improve on perhaps. And another key tool that we can use is our attendance records. Now, attendance during the probation period should be monitored in the exact same way as any other of your team members. So we want to ensure that any sickness absence is recorded in the same way and you're carrying out those return to work interviews. We also want to ensure that if there are periods of lateness, that those are picked up on as well. If you do have periods of sickness absence during the probation period, it may be a reason for, it may sort of have a bit of a red flag and cause you a bit of concern. And you can bring these up during your probation reviews just to highlight your concerns to that team member. So as I just mentioned, you're going to be using your probation reviews all the way through that probation period with the new team member. Please do use the probation records we have on iComply. You can download them and use them as a live document, update it in the moment when things have happened. I also just want to point out that you don't have to wait for month 1, month 2 or 3 to highlight any issues that happen within the practice that involve that team member. So if you have concerns about their conduct, don't let it build up and wait for the next available probation review. Have a review meeting with them whenever you need to. So you don't feel like you have to save things up for these monthly reviews. It's also important that these are a collaborative approach. So during the meetings, you're going to be delivering your observations and your feedback on that team member, but you're also going to want to ask that team member exactly how they're feeling, how do they feel they're progressing, and is there anything that they need support with? So I just wanted to sort of give you a few tips really on what you can expect and what you might want to pick up on during those monthly reviews. So during month 1, it may not be appropriate and you may not be able at this point to fully understand the capability of that team member. So during the first month, they might not have been able to deliver on many of the roles or many of the responsibilities on their job description. So during month 1, I would recommend focusing on their conduct really. So how are they? So what's their attitude like? How are they getting on with the rest of the team? What's the team fit like? Are they enthusiastic for the role? Are they asking good questions and do they want more to do? Those are all going to be key indicators to understand how their conduct is going to be long term. During month 1, if there have been any attendance concerns, we can bring those up. So if they've been late on a number of occasions, or if they've had some sickness absence, these can be highlighted during your month 1 review. You'll also start to get a bit of a flavour to understand, do they have that same experience that they've put on their CV? So are things matching up? So all of this can be sort of dealt with during your month 1 review. During month 2, you'll just reflect on everything from month 1. So that's your conduct, attendance as well. But we can start to bring in a bit more of a capability element here. So we'll start to understand in month 2 how they're going to deliver on those key elements of their job description. And they should have had that opportunity by now to be able to prove some of this to you. And then when you get to month 3, you should have a clear understanding of both the conduct and capability and be able to make a decision on their suitability for permanent employment with you. What we're going to have a look at now is the different options and the different routes you can take during that or after that month 3 review. So the first option really is that they have been successful and therefore going to pass their probation period. So have they demonstrated satisfactory performance, conduct and attendance? Therefore, you may have come to the decision that you're happy that they've met the standards required and they're therefore going to pass their probation period. During this meeting, you'd obviously deliver the news to them, let them know that you're happy with how they've progressed so far. But I'd also recommend you set new objectives and targets for that coming appraisal year, because it's an ongoing process to monitor your team's performance, not just during those first 3 months. It's also a good idea to identify any training or further development needs here as well. So your team member may express an interest in wanting to undertake some further training. Now, after you've had this probation review meeting where you've delivered the news that they've passed their probation period, I'd recommend following up with a confirmation letter. Now, we do have a confirmation template letter on iComply, so please feel free to have a look at our template and adapt it and use it in the practice. So that template letter really just confirms to the team member that they are now a permanent employee. I'd also just recommend quickly to have a look at your probation period policy if you're not using iComply, and the contract that you've issued to that new team member if you're not using the iComply version, just to check how you need to confirm probation. So using iComply, it will be that it needs to be a confirmation letter that will then trigger the fact that they've passed their probation period. So it's just important that you marry everything up. If you're in the situation where you feel that the team member has made perhaps sufficient progress, but there's still room for improvement, be it conduct-wise or performance-wise, then you may want to take the option of providing that team member with a reasonable extension period. Now, again, have a look at your contract and probation period policy just to check you've got the right to extend that. So during that meeting, when you're letting that team member know of the extension, just confirm your reasons why. You want to confirm the improvements that you need to see and the standards that you require them to achieve in order for you to be able to pass their probation period. It's also going to need to be for a reasonable amount of time. So this is going to be different for each team member and in each different circumstance. So if the improvements that you require are relatively quick to turn around, it's going to be a shorter time period to extend it by. Whereas if it's more training needs or development needs, that might take a little more time. And again, I'd recommend just confirming in writing to that team member so that they're aware of the extension period, how long it's going to last for, and the improvements that they need to make. If you're in the unfortunate circumstances that you are thinking about a termination during the probation period, there are just a few things that I would recommend you consider prior to getting to that termination meeting. Firstly, have a bit of a review. So understand exactly what's gone wrong here. Has it been triggered from the recruitment process? Is it the right person that you recruited? Or is it actually that on paper they were absolutely brilliant, but they've not delivered for you? So just have a bit of an understanding of exactly how we've got to this situation. I'd then recommend that you read your probation period policy and make sure you're very clear on what you need to follow and the procedure you need to follow to come to this termination. If you're following the I comply procedure, then we need to ensure that we've provided that team member with adequate opportunity to demonstrate that they are looking and trying to improve. And we need to have provided them with at least one previous warning that they're actually putting their employment in jeopardy because of the actions they're taking or lack of actions. I'd also ensure that we've got all our records and audit trails up to date. So going back to those probation review documents, ensure that we've got a good audit trail to follow to back up our decision and to really justify how we've got to this position. And I know I have already mentioned it as well, but please do seek advice if you're in this stage, because there is going to be a level of risk. We all know they can't claim that normal unfair dismissal because of their length of service, but there are still risks there. So please don't hesitate to seek advice before you go ahead with it, even if you think there's nothing that could potentially go wrong. Just double check. Now, during that meeting, there's just a few things to really think about and consider. So again, we need to ensure that we're following the correct procedure to come to this meeting. So we need to inform that team member of their right to be accompanied. Now, their right to be accompanied comes from our probation period policy and procedure, where that's stated as one of their rights during this termination meeting. We also need to provide them with some sort of adequate notice. So I would suggest no less than 24 hours notice that meeting is going to take place. And you could always do it in writing to ensure that you've included that right to be accompanied. During that meeting, it's going to be a really difficult conversation to have, and it's going to be highly emotive for both yourself and that team member. So please ensure that you're going to be as honest as possible. So if it is because of their conduct, don't blame it on performance, or if it's because of their performance, don't blame it on conduct. Just be really clear with them exactly the reasons that have led you to this decision, and then to confirm the decision that you've taken. I'd also recommend that we let that team member know what's going to happen next. So I would always recommend that team members don't work their notice period. As soon as you've delivered that news to that team member, they're not going to be very productive. They're not going to want to work for the practice. So therefore, you're not going to get the best out of them. So I would recommend paying them in lieu of their notice period. Now, we just need to check their contracts of employment to understand what that notice period is. I'd also try and ensure that before they leave the practice after that meeting, that you've got anything that they need to return to you. So any property that they have belonging to the practice is returned before they leave that day. We've had lots of calls recently from practices that have let team members go in their probation period without returning their keys or security fob or uniform. I would be thinking, really, in their probation period, should they be having a set of keys? If they've not demonstrated that they're responsible or reliable just yet, I would refrain from giving them a set of keys. So you're mitigating that risk there. And just getting them back at the time of delivering the news saves you having to pursue them down the line. I'd also just let them know that they'll receive a confirmation letter in the post, just as a confirmation of what you've discussed in the meeting and a clear termination date. So that confirmation letter, we have a template on iComply that you can use for this occasion. And in that letter, we're going to confirm the reasons that have led us to the decision. And we need to be really clear with the termination date as well. So make sure that we have a clear end to that employer-employee relationship. We need to have a termination date in there. We also need to let them know what to expect in their final pay. So as I previously touched on, they're going to have their payment in lieu of their notice period. Now, if you're using iComply templates, any service up to 1 month, less than 1 month, is going to be no notice. Anything over 1 month is going to be 1 week's notice. So we just need to ensure we're including that correct payment in lieu of notice in their final pay. They do also have the right for any accrued but unpaid holiday. that should be paid to them in their final salary as well. Now, I'll come on to sort of absence during a probation just in a second, and I'll talk to you more about annual leave. Also in that letter, we're going to want to let them know that they have the right to appeal your decision, who they should appeal that to, and the time frame that they should appeal. And again, that will be from your probation period policy and procedure. As I just mentioned, I thought I'd take a bit of time just to talk you through some absence that may happen during a probation period. So the first one is annual leave. So as I've already touched on, annual leave is accrued from the first day of that team member being employed, not from the moment they pass probation. They're still entitled to that statutory amount of holiday, which includes the bank holidays. So we just need to ensure that if we do terminate, we're paying them fairly for that accrued leave. Now, with annual leave, we do recommend that you ask team members to refrain from taking annual leave during their probation period. Now, if you have already agreed at an interview stage that they can take some, then that's absolutely fine. You would honour that during that period. But anything else that's a request, obviously you can deal with it at your discretion, but we would recommend that you request for them to refrain. Next up is sickness absence. So sickness absence is a big one that happens during your probation period. So there's always it's always going to be there. And I would just recommend that you are recording it and reviewing it in the same way as the rest of your team, and they would still have that statutory entitlement to the statutory sick pay. Pregnancy-related absence can also happen during a probation period. So I think, as I mentioned, we do get quite a few calls from practices to say that a new team member has informed them that they're pregnant. Pregnancy-related illness during a probation, it can happen. And we just need to ensure that we're dealing with it in the right way and the most appropriate way so that we're mitigating our risk of discriminating that team member. Your new team member will also be entitled to emergency leave. Now, we do have an emergency time off for dependents policy that you can refer to on iComply here, but if that occasion does crop up, then they would have the right to that. Similarly, with unpaid leave, they would have the right to request it, but it's actually at your discretion whether or not you choose to accept it or decline. So what I thought I would do is just have a quick look and touch upon the risks and the most costly mistakes that can be made during that probation period. Now, it's important to remember that all these risks I've highlighted are really easy to turn around, and they are common mistakes. First of all, having no contract in place. So I have already touched on this. You need to ensure that you have a contract or at least a statement of particulars in place for your team member within their first 2 months of joining the practice. Secondly, we've got no reviews, monitoring or training plans. Now, this is dealing with it in what you would call an informal process. So you don't have any records of having conversations with them. There's no monitoring that takes place, and you don't have a training plan where you've identified any needs that team member has. So the risk of not carrying out these records is that you may potentially be sort of needing to refer to them at some stage. So if you're thinking about terminating, you may need to refer to them, and that team member could say, well, it didn't happen. So it's really sort of important that you keep those clear records and audit trails. I've got fair treatment on here as well. So that's again with in relation to the Equality Act. So we just need to ensure that if we do have a team member with a protected characteristic, we're treating them fairly and equally in line with the rest of the team and making reasonable adjustments where we can. Right to appeal. So this is a really common mistake, and I would just recommend that you read your policies and procedures to ensure that you're including everything you need to in that termination letter, and that includes that right to appeal. So if you're forgetting that, that's a common mistake, but it could be a costly one. Final payments as well. So getting the final payments wrong, again, can be a very costly mistake, but it can be easily rectified. And I've also got wrongful dismissal. So as I spoke about, obviously that team member wouldn't have the right to claim unfair dismissal, but they do have the right to claim wrongful dismissal. So we just need to ensure we're doing everything we can to mitigate that risk of them claiming wrongful dismissal. And that's getting your right of appeal in the letter, getting their final payments right, and ensuring that you're not discriminating. So we do have lots of key policies and templates on iComply that I'd really recommend you have a look at and use if you're in this situation. So we've got our staff induction overview, which is a really, really brilliant document that's going to help you in that induction program. We've got the employment and induction policy. Again, I'd recommend you download and adapt that one, as well as the probation period policy as well. We've got the induction and probation records that you can use to keep live in the moment and use to update in line with your review meetings. I've got staff competence record on here as well, actually, so I haven't mentioned this one, but this is something that you could use if you choose to extend your team members' probation, for example. So you could go through the competency record just to identify the exact areas that you need them to pick up on. And then we've got our template letters, as I've already mentioned. So a couple of actions that I'd really recommend you go away and sort of implement in the next few weeks. Review your current employment and induction policy, or adopt and adapt the one on iComply. Have a look at that staff induction overview. Before you have a new team member join, just read it to ensure that you're fully understanding what you need to do when that team member joins. Review our probation period policy and procedure, just to ensure that you understand how you to deal with these issues that crop up during a probation period. And ensure that you're keeping all your feedback and reviews recorded, and that you've got the team member and the line manager to sign to agree to them. So just a bit of a summary. So we've had a look at our induction procedure today. We've had a look at why they're useful and what we could include in that programme. We've explored the probation period, why it's important to have one, and what to expect during those meetings and the potential outcomes. We've looked at the associated risks, so that's your discrimination risks there, and their right to claim wrongful dismissal. That's, altogether why we sort of say that it's important to seek advice if you need it. That leads me on really to the total HR, the total HR package that we have available. So this would provide you with a full set of your HR documentation. So that's your staff handbook. We'd also help you and support you to make sure that your team members have up-to-date contracts of employment. We'll provide you with a web application to help you manage your staff and store all your key documents. You'll also, as part of the package, get access to an unlimited access to a Code HR advisor, and you would get your own advisor. As well as your own advisor, they would be able to help you write any bespoke letters that you need or any bespoke policies. If you are interested in the total HR package, please don't hesitate to give our professional services team a call, and they'll be able to provide you with a bespoke quote. And just to quickly touch on a few up and coming events we have. So we've got a HR and employment law seminar. That's in London on the 9th of November. Now, we're really, really excited about this day. It's going to be really interactive, and I really think your practice managers, practice owners, you're going to get a lot from that day. If you would like for some more information, or if you'd like to book onto that, please use the link on the screen now. We've also got a contracts and changes Getting It Right webinar. That's going to be with our HR manager, Karen, and that will be on the 14th of November. And lastly, we've got our compliance update day. It's always a really popular one. That's going to be in London on Friday, the 23rd of November. And if you'd like any more information or to book, then please use the links on screen. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, please have a look on the website, and you can sort of view them at your leisure.